戻れなくて沈み込む闇に惹かれるままに何も疑うこともなく共に飛び立てたあの日も今は幻と消え去り帰る場所を閉ざす空に唾を吐き痛みに切り裂かれながら燃やす復活の炎にじられた記憶鮮やかに色をはらんで怯えながら光をつかめ空へと飛びかけ果てないと誰を探して灯す復活の炎強さとは何か信じることを恐れるな魂はって刻みつけたレクイエム
Oh, hello and hello, welcome. Oh my gosh, what a scuff start. I am totally late to the live stream. I don't know if anybody's going to be here or if they just bailed as soon as I was like 15 minutes late, but like it happens. No, we are here, we are back. I'm actually gonna be posting live real quick that I am alive just to make sure that everyone's here. If it wants to be here, but that's okay if you don't want to be here. Oh man, what a day. You know, life just happens sometimes, and that's okay. Okay, now we're doing this one. This one's probably going to be pretty quick too because we cover Sunrider a lot and there's a lot going on, so we are going to just kind of cover everything that needs to be covered. We're also going to be talking about like what was it about this story arc in particular, how it ties back and relates to some of the content of the other games and kind of what I think about it in general. I'll also talk about the other endings, and also kind of talk about that there's like a little bit of content that I just didn't have time to get to, unfortunately, which we'll go over, and you know it'll kind of, and then we'll end of course with the announcement of what we're going to cover next, which is going to be interesting. We'll have an interesting chat about that one at the end. So, hope you guys who are listening, welcome, and anyone who is watching post, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me on the Sunrider story. This is interesting because Sunrider was one of the first visual novels I covered, not like the first, but I think it was maybe number 2 or 3. A big part of it being, I found it was like recommended on a forum for being like an enjoyable, I just realized that there's something in the window there, oop, out of the way. It was an enjoyable series and it was free on Steam because at the time, I think they just made the first 2 games like free. I don't know if the second game ever was charged though, because they were kind of like the birth project of Love in Space. The developer team, I'm pretty sure it was the first game they made. They made Sunrider and then the Massacre Arcadius, which was basically its second, but they bundled them together as the first game basically. So even though it's game 1 and 2, they're intrinsically tied. And then I think after that was when they came out with one of the first things they charged money for, which was Sunrider Academy, which is funny because like it's a spin-off of the first game. And second game technically, but unfortunately, while I did play Sunrider Academy, not sure if it'd make great content for the channel. I could do a retro of it sometime though and kind of play it again, but it unfortunately had some spoilers a little bit on accident of stuff that they were going to put into the third game, which is Liberation Day. So ironically, I kind of saw one of those twists coming. It was kind of, well, I guess the twist was kind of implied in Mask of Arcadius, but the full implications of the twist were kind of manifest more in Sunrider Academy than they were in Liberation Day, because I remember when Liberation Day had come out. That was also when they really been able to up their budget. That's when the art style took a big increase, and it's when they started doing animations, and I think that's the first game that had actual voice work. Up until then, I think it was all just text box. Again, budget reasons, like there was a starter company doing their first thing, and for the games that doesn't have much more than just some like basic assets, they're free, so you can't complain about that at all. I highly recommend playing the games, honestly. If somehow you're in this and you're listening, or you watch some of this game and haven't ever experienced the first 3, I would recommend it. Get the 3rd game on discount, I'm sure. It's pretty easy. And the first 2, again, are free. You can try them out for nothing. Just on Steam, just download. And they also are a bit more choose-your-own-adventure-y. I know they have bonus endings at the end of the 2nd game, where there's not really a canon ending quite yet. Like they kind of, I think they might imply the ending they're heading toward, but they don't canonize anything until game 3. And that's just a trope we're going to kind of see continue into this game as well. Now, let's actually talk about the Sunrider series, kind of as a whole. The concept of it being the strategy game married with a visual novel narrative is really cool. A lot of the big criticisms I hear from people, especially if you try to pitch a visual novel to somebody, is they're like, oh, that's just a clicking simulator, or like, it's not really a game because there's no gameplay, you're just clicking. And while at first, I feel like that's very wrong, because like a game, like any game can feel very streamlined. And while a visual novel is an emphasis on story, the fact that it does like want input from a player makes it more than just a graphic novel. It's more about an experience, and the fact that, and usually the branching choices, even if they're limited, lets the player express some of their own desires and explore things in a unique way. I feel like it's tough though, because I can't deny that, you know, there's very few visual novels that have what you would call like traditional gameplay, but this is one of those exceptions because it has an actual strategy game built into it, and the strategy game itself is fairly solid. The first 2 games, I think they're fairly basic. The challenges in it are very straightforward. It's almost every fight begins and ends the same. There's only a couple exceptions. One of the few exceptions I remember is there is like an escort mission where you're trying to protect a specific target. But this still is like, it's an enjoyable experience, especially building out your kit. Like, I don't feel like the leveling up and upgrading system was quite as dynamic. It's been a while, so I can't quite remember. I know it wasn't nearly as detailed as like the game as 4, but I do think that the upgrade systems that you got were more based on like gameplay. As you progress through the story, you unlocked more stuff to work with. The short range jump and the cannon, the Vanguard cannon, are super broken. They required command points, which operate on a very similar system of like they recover as you play the game and as you like do damage to enemies and such. But it gets to the point where you could short warp jump into the best position, find like a straight line of enemies, and then just blast them all with the Vanguard cannon. And it was basically a one-shot kill on almost anything, except for like major ships and major bosses. And that was just wonderful. It was fun to feel that dynamic, even if it was fairly broken. And they do correct for that in the 3rd and 4th games. They make the warp jump much harder to access. They don't let it be as free, because it used to be so cheap in the first 2 games that there was no reason why you wouldn't just warp and then attack for a bit and then warp away. And so it can make you very, very, very dangerous. In this game, I liked that the strategy sections got a lot more challenging. It made it take a lot more time in certain instances, and that was a little frustrating, but only from the fact that I wanted to keep making consistent content. And so if I was struggling with a fight, I was having a lot of fun with it, trying to like work out my strategies and builds and try different tactics. But it was also meaning I was spending like 4 or 5 hours recording what would equate to be about 30 minutes of actual like storyline. And so that was a bit of a challenge because of that. But that was just a content creation issue. That was no other issue with the actual gameplay. I think it actually was fantastic, and the challenges were pretty fun. if I have a great criticism of the gameplay side of things, it is how they weren't so good at narratively flagging things in this game. I expressed the frustration towards the end, but it really felt like they tried to sell me that this fight is the last fight for about 5 fights. It just kept having another fight they wanted to throw at me, another challenge to do. And I from a narrative perspective and objective perspective, I don't think that was bad. Having that many layers of fights was a good way to also sell just how outgunned we were and the dire situation we were in, because it felt like the enemy was never ending, which is really what that was a feel they needed to give to us. I remember final battles and final fights in the other games not feeling quite as dire, and I think that in this game they fixed that, where the stakes felt like higher than they've ever been, and you could feel it in the gameplay instead of just in the story. So that's really, really good. Downside being that the narrative and the flagging of this is our final fight was triggering so often, it made it basically impossible for me to actually know what was the last fight and what wasn't. So that got frustrating because it just made it feel like it was dragging on way longer than it was supposed to. Almost like they designed it, had it maybe 2 rounds at the end, and then when they were doing testing, they said, you know what? It doesn't quite feel right. Let's add another fight. Let's add another fight. Let's add another fight. And it just got to the point where it was just feeling a bit ridiculous. In fact, there's one specific fight where you're fighting Kushiana, but there's no Huntress. It's just Kushiana's riders and a bunch of packed fighters. And that fight is a prelude to the fight with the Huntress. And that fight felt hollow almost, because it kind of, in hindsight, it doesn't make sense that we were fighting her without the Huntress. Why would all of her squad, why would all of her riders, why would all the specialized enemies that we've been fighting up to that point not accompany the Huntress into battle? And then we just have that same fight basically with less kind of general chaff and just the Huntress and her squad. From a gameplay perspective, I get it, but from a game development standpoint, I feel like that was a bit of a slip. It just was too many fights and fights to fight rather than feeling like the context made a lot of sense. I think it might have been better if it was more clear that maybe the Huntress was engaged with the prototypes, but they knew that the Murray was trying to escape, and so she sends her riders hey, hold down the Murray till I can get in position. That fight would have made more sense, and the idea we fight them all, but it's we're just playing a stalling game, and despite we succeed, the success of that mission is that we don't die, and then the Huntress shows up and we have that actual confrontation. I feel like if they could have communicated something like that, it would have felt a lot more appropriate and much more on theme with what we needed. Alright, so let's go over the story for a bit. Starting off this idea, because the end of the game 3 ended on a really hopeful note where everyone was going to scatter, they were going to gather resources, and the plan was to get a new ship. In fact, it was implied that that Ava was going to go back to Sarah and steal the plans of the original construction of the Sunrider, and they were going to construct a new one. And so it ended on this really hopeful note of yeah, we're going to have some time, everyone's going to get buffed up a bit, we're going to rebuild the Sunrider, and we're going to charge in again. And the fact that they throw a wrench into that and have it say alright, 6 years later and nothing's happened. On one hand, there's some gripes that some of the community pointed out that I agree with. The fact that he and Sola basically felt isolated, that they never had any communication from anybody, they had no idea what was going on, they just felt abandoned. It doesn't make a lot of sense when it's pretty clear that communicators are a thing, and even if they were worried about communication being intercepted, you feel like there'd be some way they could send a messenger, especially if they have the backing of an entire government like Ryuvia. Why couldn't Asaga send a person to give a message to him? Why couldn't they find a way to at least let him know, hey, we haven't forgotten about you? But for 6 years of this utter silence, nah, that doesn't feel like much. And then have it be when he and Sola finally smuggle themselves off the planet, they happen to be found by Asaga, who happened to be showing up with a new ship. It's it just felt really contrived and more just to have some drama. Now, the drama I feel is really important to the story. So the struggles he was going through at the time and the way it played out, I think did need to happen. But I feel like the narrative was it took a bit of like a cop-out path a bit, which is unfortunate, but I also kind of get it. Working a story and entwining everything into it to make it all pretty is tough. It's not an easy thing to do. So I can't be too upset that it wasn't perfectly delivered. And because what's the most critical thing about that time period? It isn't the fact that it makes logical, consistent sense. It was that Kato's shields needed to have a breakdown and he had to have a kind of crisis of self that wouldn't even be resolved until he'd gotten to the end of his story. Because even when he's handed everything that he thought he needed for those 6 years, he still felt hollow inside. He still felt like there was something missing. He was taking enormous risks, making gigantic assumptions, and finally had to confront eventually that he was at fault and that he was not looking at things in the proper objective way. And I think that was a really important character growth for him, because when you have a character who is so clearly reckless and, you know, Captain Kirky, if he never actually fails anything, and the times when he does fail, it completely is beyond his control or capacity to be able to like take care of, it doesn't feel as impactful. It feels like there's a lot left to be, there's a lot there that just doesn't seem purposeful. And so in the end, having him confront that and have that objective reality be that he's way in over his head, that he's been playing by the seat of his pants too long, and that he himself doesn't actually have confidence in who he is or what he's done, I think that was such a critical moment for him as a character that it was a necessity. And I'm surprised it took this long for us to have that kind of moment with him. So I'm very, very glad that they did that. I think one of the most important aspects of the story is that this is a lot more about the captain being a captain and kind of facing down the long-term ramifications of the things that happen to him, and that he can't just punch his way out of all of it. Then we see him and Sola, so they escape. They recombine with all of the characters. I thought it was a very fun narrative with Lin, because Lin looks exactly like Chigara, who was like the protagonist love interest. That fact that he doesn't just grin and bear it or move on, but it's a like epically long process of him having to confront the fact that he genuinely can't even look her in the eye, because there's just something so wrong to him about the fact that she's there, that she walks around, talks, sounds like, and feels like in almost every way but personality like Chigara. It just reminds him of that haunting past, and the super traumatic ending to Liberation Day. Like, that ending is horrifying. It's one of the actually most emotionally taxing and shocking events of any visual novels. Like, when it comes to like story, narrative, trauma delivery, that's starting to approach like Muv-Luv, which is the master of narrative trauma. And the fact that I can even make that comparison is really good. Now, Sunrider series as a whole, it only has that one sequence where I can even get close to that. Most of their sequences are very tropey, and that's okay. It's fine to enjoy. And it's not like I'm expecting this to be like an epic story that will span the ages of one of the greats. But the fact that Liberation Day actually had an ending that delivered on such powerful intense notes and story moments, character moments, it's almost hard to follow that up. And I feel like Sunrider 4 doesn't quite get to that level. I feel like it's a bit more of a satisfactory end, because 3 clearly ends on a massive cliffhanger and a massive shakeup of the status quo. So to have have 4 end in a way that actually feels like it ties up the story a bit and kind of gives us a nice bundle of like a breathing room is really nice, because 3 on its own doesn't feel complete. It feels like you almost like how the games 1 and 2 have to be bundled together. I honestly feel like 3 and 4 also needed to be bundled together. There's no problem waiting and having a delay between playing 3 and 4, but the stories are so intrinsically tied together, and their themes so parallel with each other. I feel like 3 is incomplete, and it ends on it doesn't feel like it ends on a cliff note or on a cliffhanger, but it feels like it just stops halfway. So putting them together, I think, makes a lot of sense. And if I were to recommend it, I would say, hey, play 1 and 2, take a breather, then play 3 and 4, but play them back to back. I feel like that would have a much more positive experience as a narrative and a reading perspective. And then we have the ideas of the actual upgrade systems of the ships. Again, it heralds this idea of like you need to modify your resources. You can get yourself in trouble if you don't spend your resources wisely, like I did when I kind of neglected Asaga, because despite the fact that she has some strengths as a fighter on the battlefield, I was very much more drawn, and my strategies most heavily relied on Sola and Icari. They were basically my cleanup crew. Sola was the one who would be able to like stand at range and just obliterate like heavy armored targets, while Icari was able to clean up the entire battlefields because by setting up my lines and setting up their lines in ways that made it easy for her to do a big chain, and also turtling up. And when you turtle up, you kind of cover all your bases, and Asaga never really had to do much more than maybe be the point person, taking on some of the brunt work. And then we even got gosh darn it, what's her name? My brain's just fried. We eventually get the tank. We have Kushana, and she just becomes that frontliner. Although she's so hard to navigate and move across the battlefield, that we still needed the Saga to kind of be like a tanker, a frontliner. So when I got to that story mode where she has to fight on her own, and you have to achieve a certain level of victory in order to progress the story without her dying, I really was just flummoxed and at a loss. I'm really lucky I was able to recover an old autosave that had technically been deleted, or not deleted, just wasn't accessible, but I was able to pull that out to a point where I was able to backtrack to the battle before, in the narrative before we were playing as just a Saga. So I was able to reallocate resources that I had already pre-spent on everything else, because frankly, when we started that mission with the single mission with the Saga alone, I thought it was going to be like wait 3 turns and then other characters were going to one by one appear from the sideline and be able to support. So when that didn't happen at all, that really like caught me off guard, and I was just not prepared for that. That is definitely a me problem. I feel like you should approach these kinds of games with the assumption that all your characters might have to have solo moments where they have to do their own thing, and they should be prepared enough to be able to do that. I just hadn't been paying much attention to Asaga. And a big part of that is like the character-wise. She's definitely not my favorite character. And then in the battlefield, she's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. Now she does have like, you can build her into a specific direction to help her be successful, but like I clearly didn't do that. I was just kind of using her, so she was just another body on the battlefield. Cause yeah, like when it came to like the characters who I invested the most in, it would probably went Sola, Lin, Icari. Icari I really liked investing in, but she didn't need it as desperately as Sola and Lin, because Sola was basically the backbone of my like because she would soften up all the heavier targets, and then the Sunrider could come in and finish everything off without putting itself in risk. And then Lin being able to heal stuff is so useful. I wonder if it'd be more fun to use her on the aggressive side, where instead of healing, she just does area of effect damage. I could see that, especially if you beefed it up really well, could be really strong. But healing is just too darn useful. I can't see myself being as successful without having the ability to heal my units. So it's a choice. I just don't know. Maybe there's better game players out there who can do the other options and can cover it better than I did. But that's one of the other gripes I have, but that's a personal gripe. I don't feel like that's the game's fault. That's my fault. Alright, so we go to the story again. I liked how, as we gathered everybody, all the characters had like growth in some way or another. We had Icari kind of jumping back into the bounty hunter scene, and like I liked seeing that she'd grown her contacts, that she still was like well known, that she like kind of plays up the Ronin role for a while until she joins the battlefield and joins us like properly, and then she just becomes like Tsundere Icari again, which is just great. I loved Kushina's storyline about how she was the paladin, how she was so disillusioned by the country that she like believed in with all her heart. that she ended up being basically a terrorist, but like it was because she felt like it was the one path to help make sure that the remnants of the country that she respected could live on and could survive. Like, she was absolutely misled and manipulated because she's unfortunately not too difficult to manipulate. But the fact that she, a pure heart, never like stepped back, never gave up and just fought harder the worse that she was pushed, was just such like a good build of her character, because since she's basically a gift character that comes up kind of out of the blue and just seems very kind of passive for most of the second and third games, being able to see her have a lot of growth and character arc was really good to see. I think it made it so that she became a much more solid individual, and I like how she gets handled at the end, which I'll talk about her ending in detail, but I'll just say that the way that they have her story end in game 4 and what they imply will happen in game 5, I really like. I think that Kushiana has a really good exploration as a character. I also feel like Lin has a good exploration, like I said before. I was talking at first about how Kato's relation to Lin and how that like exploration about his like inability to truly confront his feelings about what happened with Chigara for a long time manifest in the way he viewed Lin. How at first he was suspicious, and then he was just kind of ignoring her or pretending she wasn't there and grimacing every time he knew she was there or had to talk to her. And then watching him slowly kind of come to that understanding of like, hey, there is a level here of distrust, but there's also a lot about her that shows that she is different from what the Chigara was. And in fact, I really think it's important that he related to the idea that, hey, in the end, he was like, look, we both kind of went through a similar process here. We both were betrayed by these entities and people that we thought we knew. It's something that, like, upon reflection, we kind of forget that she literally was a major antagonist in the second game, in the second and third games, where she wasn't Arcadius, because we did kill Arcadius, but Arcadius went back into the mind stream, and Lin was an antagonist where she was like an opponent that we were facing. And then she gets influenced by like the shadow of Arcadius, and it was her that like allowed for like the infection of Chigara to happen. Basically, she was the channel. And at the very end of the third game, she has a point where she nearly just executes Shields right there. And for some reason she can't. We learned later the only reason she spared us was because of Chigara. And Chigara's like rejoining into the mind stream after her death, and her love for the captain had just started to infect the mind stream, making so Lin suddenly just couldn't bring herself to actually hurt him. And then it continues to infect the prototypes. In fact, the prototypes, let's talk about those guys for a while. So they are horrifying. They definitely went down the Eldritch path in this game, where before, if I recall correctly, the prototypes were the genetic cloning of the daughter of a really smart scientist. But he tried to create them, instead of just being his daughter, into being as smart, if not smarter than him. And so individual units were basically brilliant, built off of her genetic code. And then he connected all their minds so that together they could be even smarter. So they basically were running like a human supercomputer. But then he died. Now, some sources on this in the third game made it implied that like the prototypes like eliminated him, but I kind of got the more impression that he died of natural causes, but that they like took it kind of personally, and then they were the ones that imposed their own will, saying that like, we were designed to be the best that humanity could be, but we're not human, we're better than them. And so that's when they take the position of trying to take over the galaxy. We hear about how there was the Alpha, and the Alpha created Arcadius to be like a really like independent agent to infiltrate Pact, and then sent like normal kind of regular units out into the galaxy to observe, collect data, and basically get close to people in power to influence them. And it was Arcadius like isolation that kind of made them go super rogue, and that rogueness, when it got reincorporated into the mainstream, was not good. That was the one problem that I think they never factored in, was the fact that individualized units, or units that were away for an extended period of time, would develop quirks, and that those quirks could then be incorporated back into the collective, which would inadvertently destabilize things. I think it's interesting to see them explored, and to see that they've approached what they decide is the Omega, which is their answer to the death of the Alpha, where they created like a spider queen with a naked body, which was weird. That design was something else. I mean, like I said before, like having to have coconuts is a tradition of these games. The first coconut scene was even involving Lynn, and it was just really random. But then, like, not having to have any like true coconut scenes until like the prototypes come back, having them be like basically driven mad by Chigara's like genuine feelings for the captain. She shouldn't have had genuine feelings for him as part of the problem, because the agents they have were spread out to like, you know, influence and like get close to people and power, and like they would use like lust or protectiveness as a weapon to kind of get that influence to happen. But Chigara, as it became more individualized because she was more isolated than the others, and her feelings were genuine. And so when genuine love and like passion, especially from like the bond and like the relationship that she and Shields had, when that infected the system, it got like messed up, but it still became pervasive. And that like the fact that that can happen is a very interesting concept, and the delivery of it is interesting. I feel like they take it a bit too far in the sexualized direction, but I also think that that's just on point for Love and Space games. They very much have an emphasis on intimacy and relationships, and in a game like this where the plot is a lot more the focus, I feel like it kind of makes them feel like there's a pressure to incorporate it somehow, and so they did. I'm not 100% a fan of it, because it just makes the prototypes look like really weird in a way, but it makes them creepy. The eldritch horror of them, though, is the hive mind set, and then the fact that their Omega is like a spider demon. Not sure why they decided that was the right path for their like ultimate form, but there you go. I do think it was fun though, because like I was thinking for a long time that like we were gonna see more of the prototypes, and so when we weren't seeing them, but then we had like echoes of them, especially on Solar, I was like, when are they gonna like make their play? But as we got towards the end, I started thinking maybe like, okay, maybe they're gonna have another game, and the other game, the prototypes are gonna be the focus, because this is this focus is still the pact, clearly. But then they did show up, and they showed up in a way that I genuinely thought was interesting. The idea that Shields basically just needed to contact them somehow, or like express a desire to see them, and they would just like throw all their resources at picking him up, because the collective was was basically homogenized into one thing, and that's obsession with him. And the fact that it became his like lifeline in 2 instances is interesting. I do feel like we didn't see much consequence of that. At first, he had to confront like the horror that was the remnants of Chigara and her influence on the hive. That was just like a good payoff because of how creepy it was. But the fact that he was able to Hail Mary call them into his fight at the fountain was a bit of a, again, I don't want to say cop out, because I don't think that it properly was a cop out. I think it was just a convenience. It was a really cool moment when they showed up, but then the fact that we almost had no consequences of calling them into that fight at all, I feel like it leaves a lot to be desired for Game 5, where I feel like the prototypes are going to clearly become a much prominent issue, because Pact is weakened, and the Solar Alliance is, being a Solar Alliance. So I imagine the prototypes are going to become the major threat and the final threat of the 5th game, where they are probably going to suddenly, like Reaper style, jump out of the black, and I think they're going to conquer both Pact and the Solar Alliance. I think that's how the game 5 is going to ultimately like start, is it's going to be this idea of like we're in the neutral rim, we're patrolling and doing our thing. Maybe we have some initial skirmishes with Saren forces that basically declare war on Ryuvia because of the fact that Shields is there, and they have like they're building an animosity against him. So I could see them be orchestrated and manipulated into declaring war on Ryuvia, and so that could be the opening salvo of game 5, where we have to fight our own homeworld. But maybe we are like on the brink of actually like conquering our own homeworld again. And I also think it'd be a good payoff that if we do succeed, but then we just kind of leave them be. We say like we formally renounce ourselves of that land and be like, hey, we love you. Like I gave everything for this country, but you've chosen to go against, to make me an enemy, and Ryuvia has accepted me, so I'm going to become part of the Ryuvian Empire, like wholeheartedly, and like kind of leave them on their own. And then you get the signals, and then suddenly prototype ships show up and take over and destroy all the packed ships and everything. And that's the thing, is that the prototypes, after licking their wounds from like the fountain, I think the prototypes are going to come back in strength. And I bet you a big part of it is going to be that if there's anybody who can really master ancient Ryuvian technology, it's clearly the prototypes, because Lin was basically our linchpin on like figuring out like what we have already with the twin drive and like basically the ruins and stuff that we found. I think that lays the seed out for the fact that, hey, there's still a bunch of ancient Ryuvian tech like hidden and to be discovered in the galaxy. And if the prototypes have been spending a lot of their time scouring the galaxy to find more, there's a good chance they could unlock even more powerful technology. Because even like the Citadel, like the big ship that they had, that feels too big and too strong, because it was basically going toe-to-toe with an entire armada by itself. Was it able to win by itself? No, but it was able to throw enough of a fight that it had to eventually just say, hey, we have to retreat. Like, it wasn't even like they were imminently about to face destruction. It was the fact that they like exhausted their resources and needed to pull back, because like they finally had become at risk of falling. That's a high level of strength that we haven't had to confront yet, because so far it's been a pseudo ally. And so I think that that's what the 5th game is going to ultimately be, is that Shields have to actually fight against the prototypes properly and get a resolution to that storyline. And that's going to be the true end of the game, because I think the prototypes are going to basically obliterate like the two factions that we've been like working with, and it's going to basically reset the whole galaxy. I could see it all breaking up into basically a whole massive neutral rim at the end, where there is no pact, there is no solar alliance. It's just each of the planets and doing their own thing, and they're like, all right, well, we'll see what rises from the ashes here, but each planet has the freedom to dictate things as they want. And then that's kind of where things are going to be left off, is maybe like a gigantic federation where all the planets kind of self-govern, and then like have a mutual agreement about, basic tenets of procedures. Will it, remain stable? Probably not, but like it would allow new empires to rise from the ashes. And I think that's where the 5th game is going to end up being. All right, so I feel like that's pretty much everything about the plot I wanted to talk about. Overall, how would I rate the game? I think it is probably the second best in the series. The first 2 games are wonderful, but they are fairly simplistic. And so like they're going to be toward the bottom of the tier, even though like they're the initializing, and like there's so much about the games that I love there. But in 3 and 4, it just goes so much harder and has so much more development and character growth. I think 3 is probably still the best game so far in their series, because the writing, especially towards the end, is just so impactful. And I also really enjoyed, like, at the end, there's like a bonus sequence where you get to branch off and kind of have romantic rendezvous with all the different characters. And that was just really fun. The endings for 4 didn't quite play out that well, that way, but it's somewhat. So I'm going to go over the endings we had real quick. First of all, though, the Asaga ending, was able to see, like, through a third party on YouTube. It was fine. Basically more the same. You'll find that the endings don't feel like they added a whole lot. They're just like kind of sweet character moments where like you see characters in kind of compromised positions. So Asaga's is fine. I feel like Asaga's kind of like the childhood friend trope in this one, where she clearly has strong romantic like connections and feelings for the captain, and they're not going to go away. And she's basically like never gonna give up on him, and that's kind of like basically what she tells him. But like it feels like she's never going to succeed, because even the canon wise, as you'll see, like it just feels like it's never gonna happen. We had the endings that I covered, which were really good. Lynn's ending was fantastic, because now Lynn does have feelings for Shields, but she doesn't even know how to interpret those, and I think that's for the best. I think that it's honestly better that she have a crush that isn't fulfilled on him, because she doesn't even know how to process that. If they stepped forward and actually tried to have a romantic relationship, it would complicate things so much and be so difficult for both of them to actually like understand what they feel for each other, that it would be tantamount to like one of the most stress-inducing relationships in the world. In fact, a bit of a spoiler here, but it's not too much, because if you've watched as much of Sunrider, it's not too much of a spoiler. But Lynn makes a heavy appearance in Sunrider Academy, which Academy is very much on the romance path. It's a rom-com like management sim game. But as you manage like different clubs, you can eventually have a romantic relationship with one of the characters, and then they explore a little story. And in that story, you meet Chigara, and you start following her romance path. And during her romance path, you find that Chigara has a twin sister named Lynn. Lynn looks exactly the same, it just doesn't wear a bow in her hair and has a different personality. Basically the personality we see in this game. Which is good, because like that's why I said it's a bit of a spoiler, because you get introduced to her personality and character basically in Sunrider Academy. It just never gets explored until this game, which is why it's a bit sad that Sunrider Academy A came out so long ago, and B unfortunately kind of spoils some of the twists that you're going to experience in the second and third games. Not too bad, but enough where I was like, that's a bit disappointing. But the narrative in that one is actually so traumatic that to this day, it still makes my heart hurt, because I really liked Chigara as a character. I remember before I played 3, I was always a big fan of Chigara, and a big part of it was because of Sunrider Academy, where you got to experience the different characters and see them on like an emotional scale. And Chigara was basically my favorite, except for her romance path. Like, as a character, she was my favorite, and I thought she was a sweetheart, and I felt like she and Shields were a great couple. But her storyline in Sunrider Academy is so emotionally traumatic that it actually scarred me in a way, and it made me like not a fan of that storyline. And it's basically because Chigara starts having a relationship with Kato, and they start basically going out. Lynn also likes Kato, but she's a bit more standoffish and a bit more like tomboyish, aggressive kind of a profile. Like, she's not tsundere as much, but she comes across very like hostile. But she ends up liking Kato, and she gets jealous of Chigara, and she approaches Chigara and says like, hey, like, you always get the best stuff. Like I guess they're like their parents favor Chigara. Chigara gets like a lot of the notice from like all the teachers, because she's like really, really smart, where Lynn's a bit more delinquent. And she's just like, it's so frustrating that you get all of this stuff. And Chigara feels guilty about it. And so what happens is that when in Sunrider Academy, this is a spoiler for Sunrider Academy. I don't like, if you ever want to play the game, like maybe tune out for a few minutes, because I really don't want to spoil this too much. But like, I'll be done with this in like 5 minutes, so jump back in so like the stream counter's at like 46 minutes right now. Jump back in and like at 50-51 if you want to, like if you don't want this spoiled. Okay, so spoiler territory. In the storyline, Chigara feels really guilty because Lynn like is frustrated. She feels alone, feels like she isn't loved, and she really likes the captain. And Chigara feels really guilty because she feels like she always ends up taking the best things from Lynn, and Lynn never gets a chance because nobody pays her as much attention as Chigara, because she's like the star student and like the favorite child. So when you take Chigara on your like on the date where you basically like, you know, where you end up sleeping together, it turns out that the entire time Lynn was just wearing the bow and pretending to be Chigara. So the first time you sleep together, you actually sleep with Lynn rather than Chigara, and she reveals it while you're in while you're in the middle of sex. And like, it was emotionally traumatic for me as a player, let alone actually happening in real life, because the idea of that kind of thing happening is so just like, what the fetch. And then you go back to school the next day and you talk to Chigara, but she won't talk to you or look you in the eye because she knows what happened. And even though she let it happen, she now like feels like she feels sad because she feels like you betrayed her. But at the same time, she orchestrated the betrayal. And then every time you're seeing them, you're questioning because like Lin keeps popping up dressed as Chigara and flirting with you. And Chigara keeps showing up dressed as Lin. And then sometimes they're not swapped, but it is Chigara being Chigara and Lin being Lin. And the thing is, like, it genuinely gets to the point where emotionally, like, you can't tell. You just can't tell. Like, they make it so that you can't tell them apart, and it's horrifying. Yeah, so I got a few more minutes before, like, the spoiler tag's technically gone. So I'm just gonna say that, like, so with that being said, that was really what made it so difficult for me as like a enjoyer of the series to be like, oh yeah, like I'm totally down for all this, because it's like that felt so invasive that even as like a player of the game who's like putting myself in the shoes of Shield, I'm super good about like, you know, immersion in these games. And so for me, that was genuinely like a emotionally like almost traumatic moment. And I feel like it's cool that they can write a story that can have that kind of effect, but like I've never seen a romance route in a visual novel that just basically violated me on such a personal level. And I'm not sure that's a good thing. Like it kind of is a good thing, but I also don't think it's a good thing. And that's why ultimately when push comes to shove, I still say that my best girl for this series really is Ava, which is funny because like somebody actually participated in the poll. That means like at least somebody was here. So hi, thank you for showing up. Good to have you. And you agree with me that Ava is best girl because in the end she's just awesome. The real childhood friend. I feel like they have great chemistry together. I think that she has her flaws, but her flaws are also kind of sweet. I also just think as design-wise, her character's just beautiful and just like well like put together, like emotionally and romantically. Anytime you get to explore romance with Ava, whether it be the bonus ending at the end of the second game, her romance path in Sunrider Academy, because Sunrider Academy only has 4 romance paths. It has Ava, Asaga, Chigara / Lin, I guess you could say, and Sola. And so both of those do pretty good. Okay, so we're going to wrap up the spoiler stuff for Academy now. It's about the time when people are going to jump back from that. So if you were gone, or hopefully you've come back soon, or if you don't care, whatever. But hi, yep, we're moving on from the spoiler stuff. So, now to move on to some of the other endings. Icari and Kushiana, they have a tied ending, and it's very sweet. Again, they're basically doomed to be in a relationship. It feels like they already are. It's just that like neither of them actually knows it, which is really fun. If Icari were available as a romance path, which is interesting because in the end of the second game, Icari absolutely is a romance path. You have a romantic encounter with her in Shields, and I do think that she has a draw towards Shields, but it's clear that like Shields isn't ever going to be her soulmate because, you know, she already has Soldier Boy, and they're just doomed to be together. I feel like the universe will not allow them to not be together at this point, and I think it's fantastic. It's a very sweet character, stories and bonding and relationship. It's just very fun, so I'm a huge fan of it. Their ending is basically they formally they start a company together. They sign the paperwork. They make some like Kushiana makes like comments where it sounds like that they're getting like you could interpret it like her talking like they just got married, which Icari keeps freaking out about because Icari I think is thinking along those lines a bit, and Kushiana just has no clue. She's just so dense. She suffers from main character syndrome where she's so you have to hit her like like you'd have to hit her upside the head with the truth for her to actually even comprehend it, and even then she'd just be confused as to why you hit her with it so hard. But the idea is that their next game, their appearance is going to be Icari in a rider, and Kushiana, instead of being in a rider, they want to get her a ship. So she's going to have a ship that has like a deployable hangar, probably something smaller than even the Mirai, but then together, like she is a supporter for Icari and her rider, and that they're going to be taking like mercenary type contracts together. And I think that's very sweet. I think that's a very fun way to take the direction for their characters. and I think it actually makes a lot more sense as well. So what it makes me think too is, all right, a lot of times, like when Love and Space does different types of games, you find that what they do is that it ends up being a prototype for a bigger release in the future, anytime they change things up. So Sunrider Academy is a manager-style game with romance paths, right? It takes the characters and sprites from the first Sunrider game and basically reincorporates them into a different style of game that's fun, sweet, but fairly basic. Then a few years later, they come out with Starshine Idol Group, which is basically a management sim where you have characters that you can have romances with, but ultimately you're helping them be an idol squad where they're like failed idols that come together and you have to try and make them a successful idol team. I've never played the game. It's one I might play in the future on the channel. But like the idea is it basically is a souped up and specialized and kind of formal version of what Sunrider Academy was. So they used what they learned from Sunrider Academy to kind of specialize the game and make it much more like much nicer. So what do I predict about Sunrider 5 based on like the Icari and Kushiana ending and what Love and Space is recently doing? Here's my prediction. They recently announced that they're doing a fantasy style Sunrider game. It's like Legacy, I think it's called. And like in the gameplay, it's about like it takes place in a medieval fantasy style, but the sprites are very clearly inspired by Sunrider characters. And you travel around on a boat and you fight other boats. But it looks like fleet crafting is a major aspect of the game, because it talks about in some of the dialogue where you're talking about different ships. Like for instance, you find there's the Huntress and Kushiana. She's like a rival who's constantly hounding you and trying to hunt you down. So basically the same role that she's played in Sunrider 4. In that game, it talks about, in a blip where it talks about her and her ship, it talks about how her ship's really dangerous and how it's constantly after you. But it says if you are able to cripple and capture her vessel, it is a fantastic addition to your fleet, which implies that the main core aspect of that gameplay is going to be that you could either destroy ships outright, or if you are clever, you can disable them and then take them over, and then maybe through some dialogue choices and some narrative gates, like I don't know, it could be based on some of your stats, it could be based on your relationship with characters, it could be based on the choices that you make, but it seems that you get to incorporate former enemy vessels into a fleet that becomes part of your fleet going forward. And when that happens, you get to make your fleet stronger. What do I think this means? I think this means that this is a prelude of a game mechanic that will be incorporated into Sunrider 5. Like I think Sunrider 5 is going to be the end of the game. So I think the fact that we have a fantasy game coming out in the Sunrider kind of a branch off series that involves building a fleet by capturing enemy vessels or persuading enemy vessels to work with you, combined with the fact that they've blatantly said that Icari and Kushiana are going to be bringing their own ship with a rider of their own to join you, implying that instead of just having like the Murray, you would also have whatever Icari and Kushiana's ship is alongside you. That implies that you're building a fleet. And so I think that what we're seeing is like the genesis of what Sunrider 5's climactic gameplay model is going to be. They're going to use the very framework of the systems we saw here with like momentum manipulation and maintaining how you have to change your direction. That costs energy. I think they're going to utilize that and maintain a lot of those systems, but they're going to incorporate this idea that you're constructing a fleet as you travel through the galaxy. And maybe you can have so many fleet points to start with. So at the start of a fight, you can have only so many ships, but you can select your favorite ships out of your reserves. Or maybe you can have reserves that can come in after like a ship's been in combat for a while and say it gets blown up, or maybe it's forced to disengage. You can then have backup ships come in and join your fight too. I don't know. I think they're going to toy around with all these ideas and kind of experiment with them with the Sunrider like Liberty or Liberation or whatever that's called, and that's going to incorporate into Sunrider 5. And so that's my big prediction, and I think the hint is through Icari and Kushiana's like ending, is that that's the direction they want to take Sunrider 5. Now, granted, I'm sure Sunrider 5 is like in early production at best, so that could change a lot, but I think that's their intent, and I bet you they'll deliver on it. Okay, by the way, hello in chat. I see your message there. Unfortunately, in live streaming, I can't translate your text like I can in normal comments. So apologies, I don't know what you're saying, but hello. I'm happy to have you here. Definitely This definitely, because it's a small series, I definitely expect not as many people to be here. So thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you. And hopefully you're enjoying yourself, because I'm getting kind of close to the end here. All right. The next ending I want to go over. So I talked about Lynn's ending, and basically Lynn's ending is just a culmination of like her plot line, which I thought was very good to explore. This idea of like how she doesn't even know how to accept herself, let alone her own feelings. She doesn't know how to interpret her feelings. She doesn't know what they mean. And I feel like it's something that's going to be explored heavily in 5, because again, I think the prototypes are going to be the antagonist of 5, and so Lynn is going to be, facing down her own siblings basically, and having to confront like how she feels about that and how she feels about herself, and like maybe at the end she's staring down the barrel of being the only prototype left, being like the most human of them because she kept herself out of the mind stream, and then having to ultimately destroy the mind stream, and then being like the only remnant of that entire like basically civilization, and having to move forward from that. But then confronting the reality at the end when she knows that she can't be influenced by the mind stream anymore. Will she then embrace her feelings for the captain? And like, what kind of drama is that going to involve? Because that's going to be messy. Like Asaga is already hard enough, let alone Lynn. Because I think Lynn's a fantastic character, and I think she and Shield would be a really good match if they could figure out how to get past the mind stream problem. So if they were able to eliminate the mind stream entirely, I think she and Lynn would actually be really good. I think they have enough collective trauma between them that they could actually understand each other. And then we have the Cosmos, Cosette. Her ending was really interesting. Like, I was surprised by her ending, because basically we just have like a call where we chat with her while she's drinking, and she's just really open, more open than she's ever been, and kind of reveals this idea that she's actually older than she looks. Like, she looks like a child basically, but like that was chalked up in the game that she grew up malnourished, and so she never hit her growth spurt. So she's just really small and like just fairly underdeveloped, and that makes her look childlike. But then it implies that she's been around for a while. Like, I think she implied like she's like in her like 40s or 50s now. But like she's been using the funds she gets from her successful piracy to get cosmetic like upgrades and like cybernetic upgrades that basically have extended her life. And like Shields makes a comment saying like, hey, you could have chosen to make yourself look however you wanted. Why do you keep looking like the way you do? And she says, well, it plays off people. They underestimate me, and it gives me an edge in like both like physical confrontations and in fights. And I was like, okay, that's really interesting. And she was so much of like a pseudo ally through like the game. I do think she's also going to be one of those things where like they're going to emphasize very heavily that she can be recruitable in the next game if you do things right. Maybe she'll even be like the introduction to the concept in the game, where she's the first person that you recruit. Maybe you're guaranteed to be successful to recruit her into your forces. Maybe the character will still be able to choose whether or not they want her, but like it'll like maybe her encounter in game 5 will be the encounter that formally like shows you how that process and how that how the gameplay functions like that. I could see that being a really fun way to do it. And then I think she's going to be a critical character for the next game for sure. I mean, the fact that they gave her a rider that had stats that we could work with, that we got to use her in a few combat situations as a team member, I feel like it just blatantly says that she is going to become a part of the team eventually, despite her constant ravings that she's not joining our harem. I feel like it's an inevitability, so that'll be interesting. Her ending was very, very, very interesting. Then finally, Ava, my best girl, my favorite childhood friend. I thought her ending was very sweet. Basically, it's just you get to catch her in a moment of vulnerability where she's had a little bit of alcohol, and you get to see her kind of like with her hair down, quite literally and figuratively, where she kind of lets herself be herself. And that's the thing about Ava that's really sweet, especially you find in Sunrider Academy, is that she puts on airs because she has a lot of responsibility, and she feels like it's her duty to also be the responsible one. But you get these moments where you're just with her on her own, and you get this vulnerability in her, just like the very much the girl side of her, the part of her that's not a commander, or in Sunrider Academy's case, class president, but the her that's just her, who has feelings and definitely has feelings for Shields, who wants to just have fun and have a good time. Letting her be able to, she has a lot more of these moments in Sunrider 4 than I was expecting. Like when you rescue her from the planet, she kind of like cuts loose a bit when she realizes that the game's up and she has no choice but to flee with us. She kind of like lets her real emotions show. You see her kind of be herself when we go out on the town on Solaris. And then in the ending, you see her kind of just be herself. And like, I don't know how you can look at her character, her design, her choices, her mannerisms, and not feel like she's like the best. Ava is best girl in every way in my book, because as a character, she just is the one that I feel like I would personally want to spend the most time with and feel the most consistency with. Chigara used to be the best girl, but how can you look at what happened with her and like, I obviously would wish that never happened, but she's not in the running as best girl anymore. And while Lynn is potential best girl, Lynn has her own stuff to deal with, and she definitely wouldn't be in a position, at least at any time in the story that we've seen, where that would make sense or be like good for her in any way. Icari is also a potential best girl, but she's already spoken for. She already has the love of her life. She doesn't need anybody else in her life. And Ava is just Ava. She's awesome. Now, finally, the most important ending to the story. And what's interesting is like the question of who's best girl for Shields, and it's complicated here because Sola's ending is, I think, required reading. But it's funny because I bet you her side missions are the hardest to achieve in the game, and I think that's by design. But her ending is basically the canon ending. Why do I say this? Well, because in the other endings, he usually receives a soft confession from the other girls, but in the end, it's displayed that like you're friends. Not Sola's ending. Sola's ending is very blatant, because Sola's ending, when you chat with her at the end of the story, basically Shields says that like the biggest mistake and his biggest regret was how he treated her on the planet, how he wasn't handling like his depression and his fear and anxiety well, and he took it out on her, and he thinks that's one of the biggest regrets of his life. And she says that she is sorry that she wasn't able to be there to support us. She's like, I did the best I could, and you definitely were out of line, but I also failed because I should have been able to help you. And then, like he said, and then he like goes to confess to her, like he's like saying like he basically is saying that like he has feelings for her, and she just walks up and kisses him. And then he dedicates himself to her, where they basically just make promises that like, yeah, like this is the thing, like I'll do whatever it takes to help you feel better, to make it up to you. And she's just like, all right, well, I'm here now. So like basically canon moving forward, game 5 is going to be Sola and Shields. Like that's like, it's going to be the canon like romance path. So again, like I said, Asaga, she gets shafted again. Like ironically, Ava has already been friend zoned hard, even though she has feelings for Shields, but she also isn't pushing for it. Asaga basically is in the best friend position, where she has so much love for the captain, and she clearly really wants to be in a romance with him like properly. But again, she's losing. Lynn has feelings for the captain, but again, it's very clear that there's just no room for that right now, if ever. Icari and Kushiana are clearly in a thing, and then, you know, Cosette's Cosette. Like that's I don't see that being a thing. I thought they were gonna imply it as a joke. They didn't even imply that as a joke. This is not a thing. But no, I think canon ending is gonna be Sola and Shields, and so unless Sola dies, I think that in the very end of the game, that it's going to be Shields and Sola like building up, like are gonna like if there's gonna be any like have a family, retire, like have a good life, it's gonna be Shields and Sola, which is gonna suck for a lot of the fans, because a lot of us, Sola's not our favorite character. I think Sola's a great character. I think that she is like there's something very like special about her, and she got a lot of good character development, like having to confront like how she still feels so alien to this timeline, having her have a crisis of faith based on like artifacts that they find of the ancient Rubian Empire, and learning like the truth of her own origin and how she was manipulated to into being a Char, and like her purpose was essentially to die. Having her like regain some of her memories was really interesting to see, especially the memories of her mother, because like that explains a lot of her ideas of like what the Char is supposed to be and like the kind of woman she's supposed to be. And now that she sees the source of that and has confronted it, I wonder if we're going to see her being a lot more of herself in the next game, which would be really good to see, especially if she and shields are going to be a thing. I think she needs to stop being so focused on like the role she was told she needs to be, and figuring out who Sola actually is and who Sola wants to be, which like they've heavily implied is what like her future is. Like she's kind of started that process, and I think that would be really cool to see that, you know, play out, because she's accepted that she is not the Char anymore. The Char is Ava, is Asaga, but we also see that she unlocks her full potential in this game, something that Asaga hasn't actually seemingly done quite yet. And that's going to be really interesting too, because how are they going to explore that? Obviously, it took a lot out of her, and we're probably not going to get like Sola warping technology in the next game because that's pretty broken. But I am curious to see how it all plays out, and I think that it's a very fun direction to take things. And so in the end, while Sola is not my favorite romanceable character or my favorite character at all, I do think that they did a good job, a better job in this game than even like they did with Chigara in games 2 and 3, of establishing an intrinsic link between her and Shields. Chigara's bond with the captain was decent. It's just in the second game they kind of built it up this idea that anybody technically has a chance. It's just Chigara has like, she kind of had like some lucky encounters with the captain that made her stand out a bit more. But like it still felt very up in the air at the end of the second game. But the third game, very quickly they established that she and the captain are a thing, and that's the canon path. But then, you know, that ends very poorly for Chigara. And so now they're doing it again, where they're not really making it ambiguous at all, that this time it's going to be Shields and Sola. Because of all the endings, that's the only one that has any actual romance and some acknowledgement of feelings. And so I don't think it's going to be debatable that the intended canon route is that Shields and Sola. Which, hey, that's fine. Maybe it's a writer's personal preference. Maybe it's just its own thing. But I think it's interesting. I think it's a good idea to explore. And I do think Sola is a very well-designed character. So I'm not upset at it. I still think Ava's better. And I personally like Chigara and Lin more. But Sola's probably next in line. I mean, okay, if I had to go in the order of the characters I think are what I personally, if I were like, could be friends with these characters, it could be involved in this world, and could be like, and like what characters would I personally want to bond with and find myself drawn to the most, it would probably be Ava / Icari, like simultaneous. Because if Icari isn't disqualified and she were interested, she might win over Ava. Not because of the tsundere stuff. I think that stuff gets annoying. That's the one thing that she has going against her. But when she's not in tsundere mode, I love Icari as a character. She's so, like, she's just cool. She's a cool character. But Ava probably wins out because, like, the tsundere stuff is pretty annoying and would be difficult to reconcile in real life in any remote way. Next would be Chigara / Lin. Between the two of them, I actually think Lin's a more interesting character, and I feel it would be a bit more inclined toward. But that's because Chigara is like so sweet. It's almost funny I didn't see it coming that she was basically artificial, because like she's so perfect as a girlfriend character, as like a sweet girlfriend character. Like it's like way too much. It's like so over the top. We should have seen that twist coming. And then after that would be Sola. So for me, like Sola's kind of in the 3rd / 5th spot, but she's still there, and definitely is a good, interesting character. I do think Sola has one of the more interesting paths in Sunrider Academy. She has the best lore, that's for sure. And her romance exploration, like because she starts off very kind of passive and kind of dour, but as you like romance her, you get to see a lot more of her, of like her personality, and it does shine forth a lot, and it's very, very compelling. So yeah, I think it's gonna be really interesting to explore, and I'm very excited to see that, like, yeah, it looks like they're intending to make Sunrider 5. Now, when's it gonna come out? Who knows? One thing Love in Space is good at is that they don't tend to announce a game until it's basically ready for release, so they can release it like within like a year of the announcement, which is something I wish a lot more game companies did, because they keep trying to build up hype for games. Like a good example is like Witcher 4, right? Like the new Witcher game is going to come out. That looks cool. I'm excited to give it a try. But is it coming out to like 2027 or 2028? Probably, maybe even further back. But we heard about it last year. So like, and then like, don't even get me started on Elder Scrolls. Like, Bethesda almost did it perfectly, because Fallout 4 was announced like 4 months before it released. That's such a good way to do it, where you can build up all that hype and excitement and then immediately deliver it. Even though, and for me, even though Fallout 4 was a flawed game, like it made me very excited to play it, and then I almost immediately got to play it. Like I was super on board with that. I loved that. And then to have them, like, because of the issues they had with Fallout 76, I imagine there's a lot of pressure to keep like to try and keep the PR on the right direction. So they do like a little trailer for Elder Scrolls 6, which of course we're all excited for the idea of an Elder Scrolls 6, but like that was what, 10 years ago now? And there's still like no clue or timeline on how long that game's gonna be out. Like it wasn't like 10 years ago, but like I think it's gonna be like a 10-year gap. I think they announced it in like because they did that back when like E3 was still a thing, right? That must have been like 5 or 6 years ago now. And I bet you we won't even see an update on that game until it's been 10 years. So like 2030, 2020, 2032, like that's insane to think about. Like I'm excited for that game, I hope, but like good grief. Like why are you even announcing it if it's like not even in development yet? Like games need to stop doing that. So I'm grateful for Love and Space for not doing that. They tend to announce a game and then it comes out fairly quickly after. So I'm excited to see where they go from here. I will be interested in trying that Sunrider like legacy game, like the new kind of medieval type like story. I'm curious to see what it's going to be. My debate is whether or not that's something I want to try and cover on the channel or something I cover on my own, like Sunrider Academy was, because Sunrider Academy, whilst it's really fun, I don't know if it'd be great for the channel content-wise. I mean, it's very sweet, but a lot of it is very much like the mini game, the micromanaging mini game, which is another reason why like the Starbound game is one I'm not sure I'll cover on the channel, because 90% of that game is probably just managing the manager stuff with a few like character scenes sprinkled in. But if I were like uploading those videos, I'd probably just cut to all the character scenes, which would mean those games are and the new game is probably going to be like 3-4 hours of gameplay for 30 minutes of episodes, and that's I don't know, that feels like a lot. Now maybe I could also experiment showing more of the gameplay. Maybe people would find that more interesting, but I'm not entirely convinced that is true. The way that would be most digestible would be a live stream, and I'm just not at a point in my life where I can do live streams in any meaningful way, because that takes time, and like that's just time I don't have with full-time work. You know, I'm amazed that there are people who start off live streaming whilst working full-time, and then like I don't know, like they must have nothing else going on in their life to make that happen, because frankly I'm lucky I can record as much as I do. So I don't know, maybe someday down the line that's something I can experiment with. Maybe if the channel is more successful and we get a lot more consistent like support through like membership and Patreon, maybe that is something that could be in the future, but I'm not too sure that's realistic right now. Alright, well that's pretty much my staple in the game. I had a lot of fun with it. I think it was good to come back to it. I know it's something that never would have won any elections on the channel, and it definitely didn't perform as well as other things on the channel, but that's the thing, is I'm not a number chaser, I'm a story chaser, and I really liked the first 3 games, and I really enjoyed this game, and I'm glad that I get to play it. I look forward to playing 5. Love and Space, you're doing a great job. I hope you keep doing it. Thank you to anybody who's watched this, especially if you've watched this far. I appreciate you spending your time here and like let me rant on to you and post, whether you're here live or not. It means the world to me. We've got a lot of stuff to cover on the channel. I had an original workout plan of like what we're gonna do next, and I still kind of do, but we've had a few shakeups. There's a lot of drama with that poll that happened recently, and it kind of shook me to my core a bit. I've had to reassess and kind of redistribute some ideas and assets and resources and kind of the way I want things to play out. Oh, that got loud. Sorry. So I want to explore things, but I'm going to do it in a kind of a different order than I expected. So one of the first things that happened is I got reached out by somebody reached out to me from a newer publishing company that they're focusing on visual novels. They only have 2 games out currently. And basically what it is that they're not making new visual novels, but they're finding smaller developers in Japan that are making visual novels, getting the rights to translate and distribute them on the world platform. It's very much like Fruitbat Factory, who have been very fantastic supporters of the channel. I've played a lot of their games. I found some gems with them, like Seabed is still one of my all-time favorite visual novels, and that is a small development team that was found by Fruitbat, translated and published by Fruitbat, and it's one of my favorite visual novels. This is another group that's doing something very similar. So I guess you could say, sadly, that they're kind of a competitor to Fruitbat Factory. Fruitbat Factory is kind of doing its own thing now, though, which is fine. But I also I want to support people who are, going to the trouble of bringing visual novels to the world stage. They're translating them, offering them, and they kind of reached out. They were looking for content creators to cover their games. So I'm highly motivated to cover titles from a smaller developer. And there's 2 that they've released. One is a short one it's a kinetic novel that's fairly short, and it's kind of like the first chapter in what hopefully is a succeeding series. But its first chapter is encompassed in very much like an enclosed story. The second one is like a little sweet rom-com dating sim that also looks very fun. I think I want to play both games eventually. But we're going to start with the smaller of the 2. Because I think it's important for us to showcase smaller developers on the channel, and this is the time when I can, the Wednesday slot. So, for our finale, I'm going to showcase the trailer to the game we're going to cover. Now, from the developer themselves, when I chatted with them about this, they're 100% okay with us covering the title. They're actually pretty excited about it because they want their stuff to be featured. They're looking for coverage at all, so I'm very happy to be able to do that with them. I also chose to do the dramatic, shorter one. So we're going to do a short little series with them. I think they estimated it'll probably be 5 episodes long. It's going to be that short. And then when it's done, I have plans. So keep in mind that we will be doing after this one a much more popular series, because this Wednesday slot's going to bounce between small titles and large titles that might not be getting as much attention in the polls or from in channel or it's more debated interest on the channel, stuff I want to go back to. So a lot of it's going to be going back and to maybe bigger series where their sequels aren't nearly as impactful or as captivating to the general public, but I still want to see what the next parts are. So keep in mind that Wednesday slots are going to be pretty interesting, and I've got some pretty fun stuff in mind. So brace yourselves, hope you enjoy, but we're going to slowly phase out this music, and we're going to jump into the next, the kind of the wrap-up finale of what is to come. So, if you're thank you so much. If you're patient, we're going to watch kind of the published trailer for the next game we're going to cover on the channel, and then I'll see you later. So, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time, and until the next video, watching me or happen to see me in next, I'll see you there. Have a good night, guys.